so much. This should be a fun time. I'm hoping it's going to be a fun time for all. Now, you guys are all eating up there, but I have to say, I have a wicked case of the munchies up here, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to eat a few Fritos and find my slides, okay? It's all here somewhere. What was that one? Yeah. View, slideshow. From the beginning. It all started in the beginning. All right, I also want to introduce Fred Green. Fred Green is with the appropriate last name, Fred Green. He is a horticultural consultant who's done a lot of work in the cannabis field, and so he's been presenting with me, co-presenting with me on a few past presentations. So we'll have him come up and help us as well with various parts of this presentation, but I'm too absent-minded to go through on my own. Thank you. So, important to know. Well, first we're going to talk about the energy use in the cannabis industry, and particularly growing cannabis. But we have to give a little background in the industry. One thing that's important to know is that because it's illegal federally, any cannabis that's legally used by people within Massachusetts or Rhode Island or any state must be grown inside that state. So that makes a tremendous opportunity for a business which otherwise would probably go to a place where energy is less costly and labor might be less expensive. Another important thing to know, I want to say, don't ever say never. Don't ever say you will never use cannabis, okay? As I write here, the buzz about cannabis is not about getting a buzz. I mean, there are so many uses for it, and I've talked to some people here tonight whose parents are using it, not to get high, but for various issues with migraine headaches, pain that they're having, trouble they're having with that they previously might have had opiate treatment for, neuropathy. There are plenty of people that are using this and getting great pain relief. So there's a very legitimate medical marketplace for this. And right now in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, New York, medical marijuana is legal. The question comes up here is psychoactive effects. So there's something known as CBD oil or cannabinoidal. Can you help me with that, Fred? Cannabinoidal, that'll work. That is as is commonly understood. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on this, but if you check out the medical journals, it's commonly understood that there are no adverse CBD oil side effects, and it's shown to be well tolerated even at higher doses. So the thought is there's no high, okay, but it still has other very beneficial uses in terms of helping people with pain and other issues. Now, right now, what's really driving the marketplace is demand for MIPS. Thank you, Fred, for teaching me this term. Marijuana-infused products. The demand for that is increasing rapidly. And roughly 50% of the marketplace for cannabis is in MIPS right now, and that market share is growing. And it comes in all forms, a lot of forms: gum, cookies, candies, lozenges, concentrated oils for vaping and cooking. Oh, that makes me think of something. I just step back from the presentation for a minute. I'm working on this project at home for a new business, and I need some help. I'm looking for some employees. All they need to be able to do is pour contents into the bowl, add eggs, add water, and stir, and then add generous amounts of cannabis. So if you feel qualified for that, come see me after the show. I could use some help with that business. And I'm also looking for a few quality control tasting experts. So if anyone's interested in that, if you feel you're not up for the baking, we have other potential for you in this company. So right now, recreational marijuana is legit in Maine, and it's going to be legit in Massachusetts in July 2018. And medical marijuana is legalized in lots of states, but locally, the selection that's pointed out here. including Massachusetts. Right now, projections for sales for Massachusetts alone in 2018 with the recreational market, I've heard all kinds of numbers. These are relatively conservative numbers. $450 million in sales and $90 million in tax revenue. $90 million in state tax revenue, okay? People keep on saying, what's going to happen with the federal regulations? It's not legal federally. You know, why are people putting so much money into these businesses when it's not legal federally? Well, word is from the legal community, Ropes and Gray and other lawyers who I've heard speak on this topic. They said there isn't any way the governors are going to give up this tax revenue once they start getting in their pocket, no matter what the federal government says. So you can have your own opinion. I'm just sharing what I've heard, that this is too good to let go. So I think it's here to stay. It's helpful to know a little bit about what the facilities look like if you haven't been in one, if you're not familiar with the marketplace. So I'll tell you a little bit about what a facility looks like. This looks like crap, but in reality, that's really what an awful lot of these facilities look like when they start. They might pull the weeds, they might put a sign over the door, but that's really where they're trying to grow these things. It doesn't have to be a pretty storefront. It doesn't have to be elaborate. What does a sea of green look like when they're growing it? Well, this is an example of a greenhouse. Some of this is grown in greenhouses. What's probably not correct about these is usually the walls are not transparent. They don't usually like to see into what's going on in these facilities. But overall, that's, you know what a greenhouse looks like. And then somewhere, if not at the grow facility, somewhere they will have a dispensary. Some of the grow facilities have them, some of them don't. Look at the typical dispensary. There's the money shot right there. We'll look at the plants growing and some nice high pressure sodium lighting, it looks like, hanging over them. And that's only one example. I mean, there's lots of different, more elaborate setups than that, but that's a fairly middle of the road kind of a layout, Fred. You took the picture.
It's a checkerboard, which half of the lights are sodium and half are LEDs.
So
you can tell by the pink hue which ones are LEDs.
Yeah, there's lots of recipes. That's one interesting thing about cannabis. There's not one strain of plant. There's not one way of growing a strain of plant. There's lots of different variations. What people believe will work in terms of the best lighting, the amount of water, the right temperature. When we talk about growing cannabis, we're talking, yes, there's one name for it all, but it's a whole wide range of things that people are actually growing and ways they're actually growing it. And that makes it very complicated when we're trying to do building designs and energy efficiency calculations. Another look at a grow facility. This looks more like high pressure sodium lighting. It's unusual the plants are growing on the deck. That I don't usually see. They're usually on some kind of a stand or a rack. On the right-hand side is a picture of my closet. You can see the hangers and my clothes. I mean, not my clothes, no. This is the drying room where they bring the plants to dry. This is very important at this stage. You can screw up 12 weeks of work pretty quickly if you don't dry the stuff properly and it goes to mold. You've got 12 weeks of time and money invested in the product, and it's all wasted if this gets moldy. So this is this is arguably the most critical phase of the process, and you need to get your environmental conditions right for that. And as we talked about early in the slide deck, we talked about the growing portion of the uses, the MIPS, the medically infused products, which is not for smoking per se. So almost all the ones I've gone into have some type of a commercial kitchen setup. Maybe as elaborate as this, maybe less. But they're making their gummy bears, they're making their brownies, they're making their cookies, they're making all the rest of the product that they're going to infuse with the marijuana. And it's interesting because if you look at an office building, there's many presentations, and the kitchen is one of the most energy-intensive portions of a commercial building. It's crazy the power used per square foot by comparison to the rest of the building. I've seen offices where it's 30% of the energy used for the whole building is in the kitchen, and 20 or 30% here. It's so insignificant because of things we're going to talk about. Project size. So the size of the projects varies by state, so the state regulators, they regulate how much you can grow, how you can grow it, and there's all different ways of setting the regulations. Some is per square foot of building area, some is per square foot of what's called canopy area, which is the area of green over the top of the plants. And so what that leads to is sometimes, like in Rhode Island, for instance, you're limited to how much floor area you can have, but that doesn't mean you can't double or triple stack it. So that leads to some interesting nuances in terms of when you're trying to figure out the energy use per square foot of a cannabis facility, and they're stacking it two plants high. So it's that varies. And locally, I'm involved with projects that are ranging from 2,000 square feet down in Rhode Island, and right now there's talk of in the state of Massachusetts, 1 million square foot projects, two different locations, looking at 1 million square foot projects. So, what's a 1 million square foot project look like? Well, we're talking about energy, so we just talked about the easy stuff, the lighting. In a 1 million square foot building with high pressure sodium lighting, which is popular, we'll get into that. Their energy bill for their lighting alone for 1 year could be $30 million. Cha-ching! And that's why we're all here tonight, because we're talking about some serious money here. But the product could be worth $60 million, maybe more, the product that they're selling annually. So there's the justification right there. There's the driving factor. Oh, why did I have to put that up there? Energy is the largest cost component of bringing the product to market. Fred's going to dig a little deeper into that. And Fred, you're on right now. How's that?
Thank you all for coming tonight. I see a number of familiar faces, and I'd like to say that if you have questions as I'm going along, feel free to jump up and wave your hands. I'd be happy to answer them. I'll also be around when we're finished if you want to dig down deeper into any of the details. In turn, I'm going to go through more of the plant information. Let Fran deal with the energy and mechanical aspects of things. A little bit about my background. I have a master's degree in horticulture from Cornell, and I was a commercial flower grower here in Massachusetts for almost 40 years. I got into the cannabis industry in 2012, and I got into it not because I'm a pothead or a stoner, but because I saw that there was a huge lack of knowledge, understanding, experience in growing plants on a commercial scale. The people that were growing cannabis were, closet growers, underground growers. They had no background in science, they had no background in horticulture, they had no background in mechanical engineering, none of that. They knew by trial and error what to do, but they didn't know why they were doing it. And as a plant grower, I saw them making mistakes that should never ever be made. So I took it upon myself to try to change the face of the industry to one that is more mainstream, that is run like a business, that does research, that values efficiency, and so far it's been very difficult. People have almost no interest in efficiency. The margins are great, supply is small, but it's going to change. It's going to change. And we've already seen that in Colorado, where the price of product has gone from $5,000 a pound to about $1,500 a pound in the last 3 years. People that are not efficient in their cultivation facilities are going to go out of business. It's already happening in Colorado. And I try to tell my clients that they should build with efficiency in mind right from day one. And I get so much pushback. Yeah, that's not the industry standard. Why do we need to do that now? We'll build it and then rebuild it later. Okay. But I'm just telling you this because this is the kind of pushback that you're going to get when you ask someone, well, why don't you use LED lighting instead of high pressure sodium? High pressure sodium is the industry standard. The industry standard was created by closet growers who have no clue CO2 is delivered. So good luck with that. In terms of the life cycle of the plant, the plants are started from seed, sometimes they're started from clones. Clones being cutting or clipping off of a mother plant, a stock plant, and it's genetically identical to the mother. I'll get into a little bit of that later. There are two stages of growth. One is vegetative, also known as veg in the industry, and basically that's when the plants are given 18 hours of light a day. 18 hours will keep the plant growing vegetatively. It will not set flower buds, and flower buds is what you're after. That's the product that you grow to sell. Generally, it's about 2 weeks. It can be less, it can be more. The longer the veg time, the bigger the plant will be. So if you're in a state, for example, that has a plant count, you would want to give your plants a lot of veg, and you have these trees, because the state says you can only grow X number of plants. But if you're doing it, there's no limitations, shorter veg time, smaller plants, you turn them over fast. Turn them over. That's how you make money. The flowering stage is lighting 12 hours a day. 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. Depending on the strain, it's 8 to 10 weeks. Some varieties are 12 weeks. But I usually use an average of 10 weeks. Marijuana is a plant, just like every other plant on the planet. Don't let people tell you otherwise, and they will try to. Please. It needs water, it needs fertilizer, it needs light, and it needs CO2. CO2 to plants is like oxygen to people. Exactly the same. CO2, especially in an indoor facility, a warehouse facility, is crucial because you'll get many times the yield per square foot with boosted, increased levels of CO2. If you just use ambient CO2 and you have a tight facility, the plant will actually use up the CO2 that's in the air and will just sit there and not even grow. It's just like you being in a closet, a refrigerator, close the door, you're stuck inside, you're going to get asphyxiated. Plants is the same way. There are different sources of CO2, bottle gas is the most common one. Environmental parameters. Ask 100 growers and you get 100 different responses. But these are general numbers. When the lights are on, 78 degrees Fahrenheit plus or minus 2. The lights are off, 68 degrees plus or minus 2. Some people like 72 lights off, 82. Usually there's a 10 degree spread.
So they're just dumping CO2, tanks of CO2, and they're just
blowing it off.
They're just blowing it off.
CO2 right in there, yeah. But with a controlled release, I mean, it's because they'll put some type of a metering system, sometimes an air purity system, in there to measure.
Usually the controllers have a differential of maybe 300 parts per million, so they'll bump it up to 1,500, and then when it drops to 12, then they turn on again. And
so they try to seal the building envelope.
That's correct. They want the envelope as tight as they can, and minimal amount of outside air. Sometimes you run into issues with the building codes because they require a certain number of CFM for, you guys know all that stuff. But you have to keep in mind, if you're blowing air out, you're blowing CO2 out as well. So you want to minimize that.
And odors.
And the odor. Let me back up. The relative humidity, and I'll get into this in a minute. Relative humidity, 50% when the lights are on, maybe a little bit higher, less than 50% when the lights are off. Fran alluded to this briefly, but the major problem with cannabis is it gets powdery mildew. And you can lose your crop in one night by not maintaining proper humidity, air movement, and so forth. So that's, if you leave here tonight and you only remember one thing, that's what you should remember is relative humidity is key. And here we go. I get called in on jobs from time to time where they do have dehumidification, but it's not working. Why isn't it working? Well, because they put in a DX system that runs great at 80 degrees, 60% relative humidity, but it doesn't do anything when you go below 70 degrees. The lights are off. That's when you're most likely to get mildew. You can't dehumidify with those kinds of systems. So again, mold and mildew are the greatest threats. Disease is prevalent when the relative humidity is high, air movement is poor, especially in the corners of rooms and around the bases of the plants. One of the things that I always try to get people to do is grow their plants on wire mesh benches so that you get air around the base of the plant. But that's not the industry standard. Industry standard are flood tables. And when you think about it, you flood the table and the plant sucks up the water, which is great. But now you have, and you drain the water off, but now you have all this humidity left on that table that has to be evaporated. And when you have a dense canopy, when the plants are close together, the lower leaves are going to get mildew 90% of the time. So you need good air circulation. Prevention is always the best. Hydrogen peroxide does a great job of killing spores. Just put a fogger in there, an atomizer with hydrogen peroxide once a week, and you'll solve most of the problem. Only use equipment that's proven to work effectively at the desired set points. I can't tell you how many people have put in systems, as I said before, that don't work. They say, well, in Colorado, this is how we do it. This is not Colorado. That's the second thing you should remember when you leave tonight. This is not Colorado. Colorado, the dew point in the summertime, the average dew point, 49 degrees. The average dew point in Boston is 63 degrees. And what you're trying to get to in Boston for a dew point in your grow rooms is 49 degrees. So of course they don't have trouble in Colorado because it's already at 49 degrees. So just make sure that whatever system, dehumidification system you use, that it will have the capacity at 68 degrees to remove the moisture you want to remove. You need a dedicated dehumidification system. Don't just use air conditioning. Yes, ma'am.
How big is the average grow house in New England? Square footage?
The question is, what is the average size of a cultivation facility in New England? I would say that it runs probably 15,000 square feet right now. Divided up into anywhere from 10 to 20 small rooms.
But it could be central. You could have a central HVAC system serving those.
Absolutely. And Fran will talk about that.
Yeah.
But you need a dedicated dehumidification system. And again, this is something I've seen many times where there is no dehumidification other than the air conditioning. The lights go off, there's no call for cooling because the lights generate the heat, so now you have no dehumidification. It doesn't work. I always like to have a design buffer to make sure that, again, I'm not an engineer, so you guys know all about that. But when I spec a job, I always say, I want maximum dehumidification at 65 degrees. That's my sweet spot. In other words, a lot of people will say, you know, the sweet spot will be 78 degrees, and when you get to 68 degrees, now you're on the fringe. Well, you're always living on the edge. You're always on the edge of a cliff. If something goes wrong, you're toast. I like it to be so that it's right in the sweet spot where you have buffer on both sides. Of course, it has to be affordable. The way to size it basically is the capacity to remove 1 day's irrigation volume within 24 hours. When you think about the water that goes on the plants, 99% of that, maybe it's 92%, I don't remember the exact number, is actually transpired into the air. Very little is actually used for growth by the plant for photosynthesis. So that moisture ends up in the air and you need to be able to remove it. And yes, you can take the condensate, save it, and use it for irrigation water again, and that's a way of minimizing the water and sewer bill for the cultivation facility. Again, traditional DX or refrigerant-based dehumidifiers do not perform well at temperatures below 70 degrees. I did a job in Colorado. A guy wanted to use Cerna dehumidifiers. Cerna is a Colorado company that's, they say they're for cannabis facilities, great. So the guy wanted to use this, and I said, well, let's see the performance curve so we know that it will do what we want it to do. So I called the company, and they said, well, we don't have a curve. I said, well, what do you mean? Well, we only tested it at 2 spots, 72 and 82. You can just draw a straight line and then extrapolate.
It works every time.
I said, and again, I'm not an engineer, but that's not how it works. And so the bottom line was, I told my client, don't put that system in. Outside air can be used for dehumidification during cold periods. Obviously, the dew point's 30, 32, 20, whatever, but dilution of the supplemental CO2 will result. Just 1 second. I have been involved where there are studies that compare the energy consumption for maintaining the CO2 level and not using outside air versus bringing in the outside air and blowing all your CO2 outside. The bottom line is the CO2 is less valuable than the cost of the power.
Yeah, well, also, if you do not have a freestanding building and you have neighbors, you run the risk of positive pressurizing the space and getting complaints from your neighbors about the odors that are migrating.
Correct.
Because I've had a number of situations like that where I had to do tracer studies to track down the pathways.
Yep, and the odor, and Fran will get into this, the odors are
Intense.
It smells like a skunk, and it's very unpleasant, and it sticks to you. If you ever go into a facility, take a change of clothes with you, because when you come out, it's like you've been in a bar where they've been smoking cigarettes all night. It just sticks to you.
Question? I'm a little confused about bringing the outside air in. I thought that was like a no-no. Isn't there some concern about pollination or?
There is, but not so much in this part of the country. Yes, you can have male plants produce pollen that will pollinate the female plants, and then the female plants are good. But you should have filters on your system to minimize any disease spores coming in, any insects coming in. So it's generally not a problem. The outside air, I think, is where most of your contamination comes from. In terms of, we've talked about dry coolers, using outside air for using a dry cooler and a chilled water system. I think that's the best way to handle it. The last slide here is the economics of cannabis production. Right now, it's sale price is about $5,000 a pound in Massachusetts. The cost is about $1,000 a pound for a traditional facility. High efficiency indoor facilities like the ones that I design is about $500 a pound, and a greenhouse facility is $250 a pound. I tell my clients that energy efficiency is the fastest, easiest way to save money. Okay? And maybe Fran will get into that, but especially with the incentives that the utilities are offering, it's a no-brainer to not use efficiency. Yes, sir.
About the root ball, temperature of the root ball also?
Somewhat. 80 degrees, I wouldn't want it to go any higher than 80 degrees. I'm kind of a purist. You know, I try to do what Mother Nature intended, and when you think about a plant, the roots are in the ground where it's cool, and the top is up here where it's warm. And that's the way I think it should be.
So is there a way that you work that range to
Just grow I'm an advocate for growing the plant a little bit cooler, and both during the daytime and the nighttime.
Are greenhouse facilities practical in this area?
The question is, are greenhouse facilities practical in this part of the country? I would say that they are, but that would be a discussion that we would have to have over a few beers. There are a lot of pros and a lot of cons, but when you dig down into it, it's absolutely, I think it's the future of cannabis. It is greenhouses.
Is that follow-up question? Is it able to be used for medical marijuana, or can that be used more for the recreational side of things?
It would be more for recreational, but greenhouse production is more prone to disease and so forth. And so generally that product is used for extraction, that the oils go into edibles and things.
So, we're going to leave some time for questions at the end if we can, because otherwise we're never going to get through the whole presentation.
I left one of these handouts on every table. I didn't have enough for everybody. There are a couple of extras here.
These HVAC systems, I think one of the points we want to make is these HVAC systems are incredibly complex. And one thing I never thought of was talk to a guy at a show in Washington, D.C., and he talked about one day he put $5,000 worth of good bugs into his facility because we can't put chemicals on these products because they're going to be ingested, right? And then the next day, the $5,000 worth of bugs were in the air conditioning filter. So, I mean, there's just so many nuances to this design. That's, you know, we can't teach you everything tonight, but we want you to understand that this is far more complicated than you think. I thought farming, corn, anybody can grow a cucumber. This is so different, so different. So don't forget about this is a mistake that I find some of the engineers that we've been working with making, which is a little unsettling, is forgetting about the cooling effect of the plants. I mean, as the plants transpire moisture, they cool. But when you put thousands of plants in a building, you're talking dozens, hundreds of tons of cooling effect that need to be taken into consideration in your energy calculations. So it's really significant, nothing you've ever seen before in terms of mutual HVAC work that we do. The other thing that I guess we've talked about several times is my little friends here on the right. Yes, this is a pungent odor, and it can get in the neighborhood. It does get in the neighborhood. There are many different ways to mitigate the odor, with sprays and filters and carbon filters. Carbon filters is a popular way to try to cut down on some of the odor in some of these facilities. That's an expensive energy user, an expensive product, so we could spend a couple of hours talking about odor control. Which brings up another point I wanted to make is, I think there's maybe 20% of the group here that would really like to dig deeper into this subject, and I would love to have another meeting, not an evening meeting, another meeting during the day. We could spend 2, 3, 4 hours going over some of those details. So if people want to send me an email, I don't know if it would be AE or National Grid sponsored, but we could definitely have a digging deeper meeting.
We could do, if there was an interest and we could get the approval of the board, we could do a technical roundtable in the spring.
Right, so that's something we can look forward to. But send your note to the AE or to me, and we'll collect and see how many people would be interested to see there's enough interest. Economics of cannabis production we talked about, I think, already. And now we're going to get into what we all are experts in, energy efficiency, finally. But it doesn't make sense to talk about energy efficiency unless you understand the industry. So I hope you'll forgive that long-winded introduction to the industry and into the plant science. So we can now get on to the energy stuff. So, flower power is here because these flowers use lots of powers. Lighting is the #1 energy user. Dehumidification probably second, cooling after that, and then there's, and most of these are significant reheat energy. By comparison, a lot of us work with lighting power, and in today's designs, maybe use 0.8 watts per square foot or less of lighting in an office building. And for a flower room, if you're using high pressure sodium lighting today, you're probably talking 60 watts a square foot just for the lighting without any cooling. That's just the lighting power. Pretty mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Flower power. So it could cost $30, $50 a square foot annually to run a facility. That means a lot to us energy engineers, but to the growers, all they care about is the fact that it's $200 a pound or $500 a pound. They look at it as cost of their goods sold, which to them is a lot more significant than we're talking in our terms of $30 to $50 a square foot annually. I think this is one of the pop quiz questions for tonight. How does the energy use in a cannabis grow facility compare to other facilities you're familiar with? And here we're talking 3 times the energy use per square foot of a hospital or more, and that's if they're not double stacked. That's if they're not tiered. That's if they're just growing at one level. Pretty energy intensive. And we brought up the point about greenhouses already, but it doesn't hurt to say things twice. They can use 75% less energy than a warehouse grow is the other term I'll use. And but as was also mentioned, it's a little harder to control the quality of the product there. You've got outside air ventilation coming in. The lighting intensity varies. It might rain. But right now, I think I'm working on one project that's put a couple of projects where they're putting greenhouses in Massachusetts. So I think it could be 10% of the market in the next year in Massachusetts greenhouse grows.
So greenhouse, is that just purely sun, or are they going to supplement with light?
Oh, no. We're talking $1 million product here. So these will have the lighting, the same lighting system that you would in a warehouse. They'll just shut it off when they don't need it. Yeah. So, and another interesting thing that I found out when I got into this business was I said, well, I'll just look up all the information I need online like I do for everything else, right? I'll wiki it and Google it and I'll find everything I need. Well, turns out, for some reason, ASHRAE hasn't caught up with cannabis growing. And so there is no ASHRAE 70304 guide to growing cannabis. And there is no any type of industry standard guide to growing cannabis. So I found myself trying to get information and going to High Times magazine and growers blogs, and finally finding Fred to give me some real insights into the industry. So that makes it a lot more challenging too, because it's real. Just finding the information is so challenging about how to design specs and how to do this work. Talk about lighting. Lighting's the big energy user. The standard, the traditional standard, and what's still used in the vast majority of installations in Massachusetts and around is high pressure sodium lighting. I thought that was just for streetlights. But here we're back to high pressure, not even metal head, all the way back to high pressure sodium lighting. Typically 16 square feet per 1,000 watt fixture. I mean, that's just crazy. That's for the flowering stage, but that's the big stage. The flowering stage you're in for 8 or 10 weeks. And the other 2 stages could use less lighting, but they're only in those stages for a couple weeks each. So this is where the money gets sucked up, in the flowering stage and this lighting. Okay, this is important too. Now I can't take credit for this term, but this is something we should all remember. Lumens are for humans. Okay, plants don't care all about lumens. All right, forget about lumens. We learned about them for years. Forget them. If you're talking plants, you're talking PAR, which is very basically the wavelength that plants love. Okay, that's the range of the wavelength that the plants respond to. And then micromoles is another term you'll hear, which measures the intensity of the light. So some new terminology to learn about as well. Again, showing different types of lights. You know, high pressure sodium is pretty much, if you're applying for incentive, that's what we consider the base case. We're providing incentives right now for ceramic metal halide and for LED. And there is some plasma that's being done. It's a very expensive lighting product, but sometimes it's used to enhance the color spectrum. So sometimes plasma is mixed in with another lighting tray.
Fran,
to blend it. Yeah.
so the LED can deliver the same requirement to the plant
Right.
as the high pressure?
Power
cylinder?
micromoles, yes.
And the same frequency, like that, okay.
Yeah.
Like that
Well,
frequency is possible?
This is another interesting thing. We all remember lighting standards and the fact that there weren't always standards, and it depends which yardstick you use to measure how many lumens you were getting, how long the light bulb was lasting. Well, there's no official yardstick yet for testing agencies to test these LEDs too. So if you call a LED manufacturer or a ceramic metal halide manufacturer, they will no doubt tell you that, oh no, it's even better than that. It's even better than, it's better than better than. But, in the end, you don't exactly know what you have unless you measure it yourself. But there are enough people using LEDs now that I can say that people are comfortable that they can get what they need out of it, but not everyone's comfortable. Okay, the main barrier to LEDs is not the economics right now. It's the comfort of the growers.
That's because they're
And that's another interesting thing. When you're working with one of these facilities, unless you're working with a national company, the ultimate decision on all these factors is one person who's probably 26, 28 years old, and he's responsible for this grow. He's responsible for getting all these plants to grow and bringing the money in the door. So if he says, I don't like LED, the LEDs don't go in. Okay, so that's another interesting thing, because the growers rule, because it's all about growing, right? They rule in the end. So here's one example of an LED case study. I'm not going to say that the economics are the same for every LED type, but here was a project that had 312 LED lights in flowering rooms. They could save $75,000 a year without looking at the HVAC savings, which could be significant as well, in their facility, and they could get a 3-year payback before incentives. Some might have a shorter payback, some will be longer. All depends on whose LED fixture you're looking at and how much you're buying it for. So now I'm going to move on to HVAC. HVAC runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. It's got a big job. It's got to remove the heat of the lights. It's got to do that ultra-critical dehumidification. And then there will be, in many cases, most cases, there'll be a reheat as well, because especially if you have a chiller, one of the ways to remove the humidity, some people use a pericoiled coil, 32 degrees. That'll bring the air down to a lower temperature than it needs to be, so then we're heating it back up again. But we need to bring it down to that temperature. We're using a coil to remove the humidity. Mold destroys crops. You got that message from Fred. HVAC is a real mixed bag, and I can't say. National Grid's been involved in like 15, almost 20 of these projects already, and this is starting in just about a year, so 15 or 20 projects a year. And I can't say I've seen chillers or split systems or dominate, or VRFs dominate more than others. Maybe VRFs is a little bit lagging, but there's no one thing that's really jumping out as the predominant source over this big time of a year. Common dehumidification methods is one very common way is to use a desert air system. If you're used to the swimming pools, you're familiar with pool pack units made by desert air. It's very similar to that system. Chilled water coils are very popular. Bigger installations are using chillers with very cold water temperatures down in the lower 30s. And then there's a heat recovery unit that's pretty popular. It seems to have been designed specifically for the cannabis industry. It's called MSP unit. We're seeing uptick in the use of those. They're energy efficient and they seem to get the job done as far as dehumidification. I'll talk about those in another minute. It was my dealer. VRFs are interesting. They're very, very popular on the West Coast, somewhat popular on the East Coast. There's an interesting thing in Massachusetts where the Clean Energy Center is giving grants for up to $180,000 for installing VRFs in any type of facility, but they've confirmed that VRFs in these grow facilities would be eligible. So that's a pretty healthy incentive, so that may drive some people in that direction. You still need some supplementary dehumidification with those. They don't have the cold coil, they don't have the dehumidification capacity, but it's an option. I'm not judging options, I'm sharing options, okay? So, all good right now. Everything's good right now, as long as you do enough dehumidification. This is an MSP unit. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail, but what it does is, it does use a 32, 35 degree chill water, and so when the water leaves the coil, it's colder than it needs to be to meet the cooling demand for the room, especially at night. So it uses the return air temperature of the room to going through a heat exchanger to reheat that air that's leaving too cold. So you can save quite a bit of energy on the heating and cooling side. The numbers on those are working out pretty well right now. The psychometrics on it, that's for the heavy hitter. That's definitely for the heavy hitter calculating the energy. So. And we have the high-end HVAC systems. And we've got people in the room that I know represent all these various products. But we're seeing particular growth in the gas engine-driven chiller marketplace, because the heat can be recovered for dehumidification and things like that. So that's where you use a gas engine as the primary driver instead of electric motor to turn your air conditioning compressor. There's also one project in here. Carl Oreo is here somewhere. Carl, he made me aware this past week of a deep well project in central Massachusetts that's actually using ground source heat pumps as a cooling source for those for a cannabis grow facility. And there's lots and lots of talk about combined heat and power systems using absorption chillers as a place here in this market. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it talked about time and time again. It's out there, I'm sure. Somebody's got to run the numbers, somebody's got to put the money up to make it happen. HVAC.
Hey Fran,
yeah.
do you know of any CHPs actually currently running anywhere in the country?
No, but I have to tell you, I'm fighting so hard to just keep up with the flow. And we have like so many projects flowing at us right now. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. What's that?
Medical marijuana in Massachusetts has CHP.
There is one? Okay. Agawam, you said?
Medical marijuana. Plymouth.
Oh, medical. Oh,
Plymouth.
Plymouth. Okay, I haven't seen it. So that must be it's probably an Eversource job, right? I haven't seen it yet.
Now, as they move to this larger size, 1 million square feet, they will go into CHP.
Yeah. I'm certainly not saying it shouldn't be done, it couldn't be done. I'm just saying I can't speak to it because I haven't been involved in the projects, I haven't seen the numbers. He's freedom. So, potential HVAC measures. In some cases, we'll be able to offer incentives for desert air dehumidification. I don't know this one.
That would be fine.
Desert air, but in some of the analysis we're doing show that the desert air dehumidifications may be the lowest cost system to install for some of these facilities. So that's a question whether it's an energy efficiency measure or just the base case. Gas engine driven chillers is a more expensive solution, along with combined heat and power, and those, I would call best practice measures. The MSP units we talked about, unique for cannabis, and we're providing incentives for those, and they've been pretty healthy. Economizers, I've only seen on one project, and you guys know how to do energy efficient chillers and condensing boilers. There's incentives for those as well. There's efficiency there. What I've seen in the last couple of weeks is what looks to be the best package that's been coming across my desk. And again, I'm not the world expert, but having done 15 of these, I've had most of you. And, it seems like the combination of a gas engine driven chiller and an MSP unit has some real advantages.
Who makes the gas engine driven chillers, Fran?
Nobody in this room. No. Tico Gel locally. There are others, but yes.
He right across the street.
Hello.
He doesn't need to sell more.
Yeah.
He's very shy over
Yes,
there.
yes.
Yeah.
He's trying to make a living.
Yeah, there we go. And so we're going to get quickly into the incentives here. There's incentives in all this, in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, upstate New York. They're all being done custom right now. There's no prescriptive incentives. Not even the lighting is done prescriptive. And this is what everybody wants to know. How much money am I going to get for incentives? I've seen some in the $50,000 range, and I've seen some recently in the $1 million range. And so there's a pretty big range. And if $1 million excites you, then maybe you want to talk to me afterwards, because I can talk to you about how to get one of those. Short package, oftentimes the paybacks are so short, even without incentives, they're under 2 years because of the long run hours and heavy loads. To get the most incentives, LED and HVAC working together seem to get the better incentives. And the top end incentives are, no question, going to LEDs and to the high-end HVAC solutions, which is CHP and gas engine driven chillers. That's where the big dollars are going. Here's a, this is going to be hard for everybody to read in the back, so maybe I won't go into all the details of it. But this is an actual project, a 45,000 square foot facility with a pretty comprehensive set of measures, including condensing boilers, a gas engine driven chiller, okay, VSDs and hot water pumps. It had some energy efficient lighting in it, so it had a good package of measures. And with about a $330,000 incremental cost, and if National Grid was passing out incentives for that, it would probably get about $200,000 worth of incentives. So that's 45,000 square feet, getting, we're talking $2, $4 a square foot, something like that. So it's not a bad number. So here's a gas engine driven chiller project that was looked at in Massachusetts. 200-ton gas engine driven chiller driving a 33-degree chilled water. A chiller that delivered 33-degree chilled water. That was not easy to say. And so it was compared to an electric chiller job. The incremental cost was just about $100,000 on that. And electric savings about $40,000 a year, but you have gas cost, so you're burning up $20,000 worth a year worth of gas. So you netted about $18,000 a year in energy savings.
Does that include the demand charges?
Well, that's in Massachusetts, in Mass Electric. Flashback. Where did that come from? National Grid Service Territory. I need more Fritos. National Grid Service Territory. The demand charges are pretty insignificant. So it doesn't include that number in that average. It's not significant here. It'd be nice, obviously, where you have a significant demand charge, you're going to get a lot more benefit out of that gas engine driven chiller, because you get a lot more of that in your pocket.
Since these plants pump CO2, can you reuse the exhaust?
There are systems that can scrub the exhaust. I haven't seen it being done, but I'm not saying it's not being done, but I haven't seen it. So.
Not directly, it cannot come directly, you have to scrub it.
There's a big issue with, I know even these, you can make your own CO2 with these gas burners that you put into space. But I talked to, on one project we were working on recently, they said, well, they're designed to do it that way, but they're forced to use bottles because the manufacturer of those doesn't have UL rating on their equipment, so they couldn't find one that was UL rated. So there's technologies out there, but you've got to find one that's going to pass all your rules, regulations, safety. And I'm still new to this game too. I don't have it all worked out yet. So there may be solutions to some of these issues that I just can't speak to adequately right now.
Fran, I have a question for both you and Fran. So it would seem, what I've heard is each one of these grow houses is going to be sort of a unique situation. They'll have a unique solution to their HVAC, ventilation, and heating and cooling needs that has been put in, however, and come the time that they're going to finally realize that there's a better way, you're really going to be looking at a unique problem, and you'll need to come up with a custom solution. Now, do I have that right?
Yeah, it's pretty customized. We're finding a few people hiring the same designer, and that designer will try to apply his design in multiple locations. But every time there's a designer or a new set of operating conditions, there have to be some modifications. I've got one facility I'm working on today, I was looking at today. The grower has talked about some most unusual watering levels of irrigation and most unusual temperature and humidity set points. And we compared the energy use for that facility using the equipment that they're about to purchase, using their design points and using the worst case design points that I've seen on all the other facilities I worked at. Not the best, not the most conservative, the least conservative, and that the energy use changed by a factor of 2. So they're saying just by changing their design conditions and saying, I can grow it this way, even though Fran Boucher has never seen it done that way. And I'm not the expert, but they're going so far in the limb, they're actually doubling the amount of energy use. And it obviously changes the economics of the systems that you're looking at. So you've got the same number of plants being grown in the same building with the same equipment, and all it is a matter of changing the grow specs, and you double the amount of energy that it's going to use.
So you have an artiste.
Yeah, we do. But I mean, these are all things you have to factor in. And then there's that damn utility company who has to say, well, he can take a risk, but this is the ratepayers' money too. How much risk do I want to take that he's going to actually be successful in growing those conditions? And part of that is informed by the fact that we're working one particular facility where medical marijuana hasn't been regulated in Massachusetts or allowed in Massachusetts that long. They're putting in their 3rd HVAC system now. So people are now getting it right. Fred knows too.
I just like to say,
And just one more question, follow up to that. Do you have any benchmarks that we can, MBTU per square foot?
You sign up for my $100 seminar.
I'll hire you for my technical roundtable. We all know how much you're going to make for that.
I think one of the challenges for everybody in this room is realizing that the people that are providing you with the information that you use to design the systems, as I said earlier, they have no idea what they're talking about. And what I do basically is I act as a translator or an interpreter where I help growers quantify and qualify what it is that they want in their grow rooms, and then hand that over to the engineers in a format that the engineers can then use to design a system. I've seen it many times now where the grower tells the engineer what he wants, but he doesn't really know what he wants, and the engineers, this is such a new application, they don't know what they don't know, so they don't know what to ask the grower. So there's a disconnect there, and like Fran said, I'm familiar with at least one project where they're on their 3rd system. It's because the grower came from Colorado and he did exactly what they do in Colorado, and it didn't work. And again, just make sure that the information that you're getting is true and accurate.
Are the different strains of plants able to operate in different conditions? Are there plants that are more
Let me just stand.
hardy?
We're going to be. This is done. We're into Q&A, deep into Q&A.
The question is, do different strains require different conditions? And the answer to that is yes, but it also, as Fran said before, it depends on the grower. Some growers will lump everything together. Other growers will swear that, you know, there are 2 major types of marijuana. One's an indica, one's a sativa, the hybrids. And indicas like it cooler, sativas like it warmer. Sativas grow very tall, indicas grow very short. Some people say you don't grow them in the same grow room. It's just up to the grower. And I know some growers, and again, this is an example of something that you may run into. One grower that I know, he likes to use, to run the night temperatures around 60 degrees the last 2 to 3 weeks because it accentuates the color of the buds. When it gets cold, the bud color, like there's one called blueberry gum, whatever that is. but it has blue tinge to it that comes out when it's cold. But he told the engineer said, well, what do you want your grow room to be? Well, I want it to be, 80 and 70. Well, he didn't tell the engineer that he wanted to run it at 60. So then he tried to run it at 60 and the dehumidifiers didn't work and he got mildew everything. So then he blamed the engineer.
So I get three fairly related questions, so I'll ask them all sort of at once. So the average size of the where you're growing these plants is about 15,000 square feet, you said?
I said that's the average size.
Average, right.
But you can have, like Fran said, 2,000 feet all the way up to 500,000 square feet.
Right, so are these owned by, are most of these facilities owned by a single owner, or is it a larger
Investment
corporate investment?
Well, not corporate.
Group?
No, don't say corporate. There's,
Well, that's
there's
what I'm wondering. Is it
There's
corporate?
investment groups.
Investment groups,
In
right.
Canada, there's corporate. I mean, InBev, one of the big beer manufacturers, just bought a huge grow facility in Canada because it's all above boards in Canada. But in the United States, you're going to see all private investment.
Gotcha.
The investment funds, private equity funds, are dabbling in it, but they have to be real careful because, again, they have to tell their clients that their money is at risk because it's federally illegal.
Right, so it's federally, that leads to my next question, which is, so it's federally illegal, and my understanding is, as a state, we hold our police powers, but as soon as the activities go across the state, now you're breaking a federal law.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, so you have to stay local in your state, essentially, right?
Correct.
Now, how does one compete, and where will we have to compete in the future? I.e., where are the laws changing in the country? Because if we have to compete with, Alabama for
What?
then where power is a fraction of what it costs up here, and power is the primary most
Except
the
there's
first.
different weapons.
I don't want to give you the bad news, but I have to, and that is that Colombia just legalized 2,500 acres of outdoor marijuana production. And once it's legal federally in this country, you'll start seeing it shipped in. Like Canada, I worked in Canada for a year, and the companies up there, they're now shipping to Australia, they're shipping to Germany, Uruguay. I mean, it's going to be
So investing heavily here locally.
Yeah, this is energy. We're not talking about how to pad your 401k here. Come on. What's this all about?
What I'm talking about is investing in trying to understand this market. If you're a local provider, is it really worth your? Where is this market going to ship right out of here? It's
No,
really worth it.
and I can use my own personal experience in that regard. I was a cut flower grower for 35 years. Cut flowers that are used for arrangements, weddings, funerals, all that stuff. And our biggest competition was from South America, from Holland, even Florida, California, but Holland, and now it's in Africa, in Kenya, and they ship plane loads every day, just 747s worth of product. And you're correct, in like Colombia, the climate there is ideal. The day lengths are the same, plus or minus 30 minutes. The temperatures are uniform up in the mountains, 75 in the daytime, 60 at night. The labor is cheap. The only problem is that they have to get the product where the people are, which is here. And the reason why my company was successful was because we promoted we had a logo, the state has it, Massachusetts grown and fresher. And it's just kind of like the craft beer industry where people want to know where it's coming from, who grew it, how it was grown. And there's always going to be a Walmart of weed, and that stuff's going to come from South America or wherever. But the people that want to know that there are no pesticides on the product, they want to know that it's fresh, it was cured properly. There's always going to be a market.
You think that you that can compete globally here, and that this
Yes.
industry is going anywhere.
It depends at what size. At what size? Yeah, I think that's my. I would say at what size, because there's a lot. This could get way overbuilt. You know.
Yeah, and at the same time, when Fran says way overbuilt, if you look at what's going on in Canada right now, where it's legal federally, medical, and it has been for a number of years, and now it's legal recreational next July, the companies there are building, they're starting at 500,000 square feet of greenhouse and going up to 1 million. Like the company is called Canopy Growth now, that's what it's called now, it was called Tweed earlier. Now they have 2 1 million square foot facilities under contract. And keep in mind that Canada, the population I think is 30 million or something like that. And the demand, that's another thing. I don't know how everybody in this room feels. If I could just editorialize for a minute. The reason why I support cannabis is not because I use it. I don't care. The reason why I support it is because there is so much consumption around here, and all of that money goes out of the country to wherever the cartels are. I think that money should stay here. The job should be here. The product that, and it's not like cell phones where we have to create a new market. The market is already here. And some people don't want to hear that. I'm sorry, the market is here. The black market is here. And so what the industry in Massachusetts is trying to do, and all over the country quite frankly, is to eliminate the black market and collect the tax dollars and use those tax dollars to benefit the communities.
Got one back here. Mr. Cook.
The information is that 1% of the electric use in the U.S. is cannabis, or 2% in California, 2% Colorado. And in Massachusetts, the energy use is going to go up. Is that the perspective that how that's going to affect utility power supplies?
That's what utilities are doing. Okay, that's it. That's it.
And our ranking is #1 in the country is an energy efficient state. What is that?
We're going to have energy efficient cannabis. I guess we're not an energy efficient state because we're using less energy per capita. It's because of the quality of the programs that we run to help use less efficient, to help people to use things more efficiently.
Is there a traction point for you guys with LED, and then it allows, the right type of LED could allow people to do shifting in terms of coloring or varying intensity?
There's talk of that. I mean, we're not into the moles and the powers and the micromoles at this point yet. We're waiting for a design light consortium type of organization to get involved and set some standards. Right now, we're just throwing, these projects are coming at us. $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $1 million, $2 million, 3 million kilowatt hours of savings are coming at us by the droves, a couple a week. We're just trying to handle it, frankly. I mean, it's not that we don't want to do a better job. It's not that we don't want to answer these questions. It's like, this was never on the radar. The resources were never put aside. This was never in the 3-year plan. It's like, wow, look at this gift. But then at the same time, as much a gift as it is, so we get into it and it's like, this is freaking complicated, you know. So it's been a gift from the bottom line, it looks like, but even that could fall apart on us too, because we could be off on some of these numbers. Evaluations will come back and kick us in the teeth. So this is a complicated field for the utilities. It's a complicated field for the engineers, and some people apparently stand to make a lot of money. But we'll see how that all shakes out. It's still early. I've done this presentation 3 or 4 times only in the last 4 months. Every time the presentation's different. It's moving that fast. It's not slowing down. The changes aren't slowing down in terms of getting up to speed with it. And I work on this at least 20, maybe 30 hours a week. I'm struggling to keep up with it.
Fran, do you have a baseline that you feel comfortable with at this point, or do you even have a baseline in terms of existing conditions?
The baseline's moving. The baseline's moving all the time. Because the baseline when we started was what we're doing in Maine and what a few early growers had done here was just put in total garbage that didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we're seeing some real pros coming in, and they're putting in, the trend is towards much more elaborate systems. So that's why I said desert air, for instance, which only a few months ago I thought was a ECM. Right now, I'm not sure if it's not the base case because everybody is, moving towards so much even more efficient systems, sort of coming to us at the design stage. So it's a moving target, and I have internal battles to fight too because nobody in my company is used to base cases moving that fast. It's like, what do you mean? You did a project 3 weeks ago and you gave me 1 million kilowatt-hour savings, and now you're giving me 500,000 for the same one. It's like, it's the industry. Well, nobody, but you people understand more about this industry after sitting in here than virtually everyone in National Grid. Because people, it's the stigma about it, the preconceived notions about it being agriculture. People just assume they know, and boy, I assumed I knew. I know better. I mean, I can point the finger at them, but only by pointing the finger at myself. I thought I knew too, and it's wild. It really is. It's the most interesting, most exciting, most complicated thing I've been involved in my career, other than getting married.
The question a minute ago was about a baseline, and Fran's speaking on how that baseline is changing, and the reason why it's changing is because the value of the crop is so high that you lose one crop and you would pay for that high-end HVAC system in a matter of weeks. Like one crop, an 18,000 square foot facility that I did some work on does about $5 million per crop rotation, and they do 6 crop rotations a year. So $5 million, they lose one crop. The high-end HVAC for that facility, was a little over $2 million. So when they first went in, $1 million, they think that's great, but then they end up throwing $5 million worth of product out the door. Now, I think that's why it's changing. People realize that they're being penny wise and pound foolish.
Even we talked about the other day about emergency generators. We've had power outages all over the place this last week, and Fred said some people were fighting putting emergency generators in. Well, if they were cold over the last few nights, what happened to those plants? Or if they didn't get dehumidified properly, did they get mold? Maybe that generator would have been really cheap. So they're learning, we're learning. It's an interesting game to get if you can get involved in it. And if you want to get rich, if you really want to make the big money in this industry, the people making the big money right now are the growers. Learn how to grow this damn crap. And go be the grower for one of these facilities, because I'll tell you, those guys they're so sought after. They're so respected because there's so few of them that really know how to grow at this scale. Any other questions? Well, maybe we should wrap it up and take other questions.
Oh, Carl, you say you know something about
Well, thanks, Fred and Fran.
bacteria and well water.
Appreciate everybody coming again. The 15th of November, the roundtable. Kathy Stanley is managing that energy storage, and it is filling up fast. So hopefully we'll see you all there. Thanks for coming.